there's making use of these divides. All right, this is not a very happy story. I realize that, so I'm going to summarize briefly and then tell you a story that will hopefully make you laugh. So, yes. So what I mean, I've titled this talk The Politics of Resentment, and by that I mean this division that I've just shared with you is not the only division we have in our politics these days in the state or in the country. Oftentimes we're talking about Republicans and Democrats, but there's a way in which there are many divides amongst us that are being used for political gain. It's important, I think, for those of us who are observers to notice that that is what's being used to convince people to support a policy as opposed to an appeal to broader political principles like libertarianism or like a principled stance in favor of reducing the size of government. That's not necessarily what has gone on in Wisconsin. Instead, it's been arguments about we need to cut back the money going to those people because those people are bad. They're not like you, they're bad, and they don't deserve it. Another thing I want to say is that the story I'm trying to share with you all is that we teach these things to each other. I mean, we can chuckle about what I heard out in rural areas of the state, but we are probably doing the same kind of us versus them conversations in the cities, right? We teach these things to each other, but our politicians don't help oftentimes either. I don't have an answer for that. I'm hoping you all do in our conversation today, but let me now stop and tell you a story that I hope will make you laugh. And I know some of you have heard this before, but I hope you laugh anyway. So, in the beginning, I showed you a picture of a diner on a main street. And I always show that picture because it's one of my favorite places that I visited, because when I sampled that community, I called up a UW Extension agent and I said, where can I go in this town? And this person said, well, there's this group of folks who gets together in Donna's Cozy Kitchen, I think it's called, every morning, but you gotta walk through the curtain in the back of the room because they play dice. And so I said, okay. So the first day I went, and it's about, I think, 6:30 to 7:30 this group meets, and I went and they stopped playing dice and they listened to me very politely. I had my recorder on, and then at the end of the hour, at 7:25 they play a dollar round. I think otherwise it's a quarter bet, and they sit at this L-shaped table and they pass a little soup cup along and put their quarter in as they shake, and they're talking and shaking and drinking coffee. And at 7:25 they play a dollar round, and they turn to me and they say, do you know how to play ship captain and crew? And I said, well, yes, I do, actually. And they say, well, and I'll explain what ship captain and crew is in a minute. They say, well, next time you bring your money. So I did. Ship captain and crew is this dice game where you have 5 dice in a cup, and you have 3 rolls per turn. And you have to shake a 6, a 5, and a 4 in that order, and then the remaining 2 dice determine how high your turn is, or how your overall roll is. So on my 3rd visit, the second I played and I didn't win, just played along and talked. My 3rd visit, another thing you need to know is that there's a horse auction going on in town that day. My 3rd visit, I'm winning quite a bit. So, and I keep winning, and then the dollar round comes, and I don't even need to tell you what happened, but it was very uncomfortable because this is my 3rd visit. I've been doing this field work now for maybe 3 years. And then, Madison, people in Madison, you parachute in, suck away all our money, and then leave. So I'm so uncomfortable. So I'm trying to joke along anyway. So at this point, I hadn't won the dollar round yet. We're just joking and playing dice, but I won some. And this guy, Henry, says to me, he's asking me about the horse auction and if I'm going to stop and check it out before I go home. And he says, why don't you buy one of them horses? I got a trailer. And I say, Henry, I'm not sure where I would keep a horse. They know, I'm a professor at the university. I live a mile out of campus, and I don't hardly even have a driveway, much less a place for a trailer. And he says, what are you talking about? I said, I'm not sure where I would keep him. He says, well, you keep him in Madison. That's where they keep all the bullshit. Yeah, and well, basically all you gotta do is buy the front end of the horse. They got the back end in Madison. So then I won the die round. And I should say, I mean, we're laughing like we're all laughing now. And oftentimes these, kind of painful attitudes are being communicated to me in this very not painful way. It was often very, very fun. And so I'm trying to joke to get over this. And one guy had already left in a huff, but I say, well, I come and I ask for your thoughts and I take your money. And Richard says, well, I tell you what, that's good though, because we have so little of it. And I say, well, it all goes to Madison anyway, right? Ha, ha, ha. And Howard says, we expect nothing less from Madison. And Richard says, well, won't cost any postage to get it down there now. So, all right. So that's the end of my remarks. I would love to hear your thoughts. Anything at all. And really, well, sorry, you better. Don't feel like you have to talk about my study. If there's things you want to ask of one another, this is a great organization and a great opportunity for doing that. And partly, I should also say, much of the stuff I'm talking about feels a little old right now, but it seems to me it's all about to renew itself with the gubernatorial election. So we have a lot to think about and a lot to discuss. So please, anybody, please.
I represented school districts throughout the state of Wisconsin, and we talked with our colleagues. We did a lot of collective bargaining. And a lot of the management attorneys kept saying to people, be careful what you're asking for in the unions. You're building resentment in these communities. And somewhere it's going to show up in either board members being anti-union or anti-education, because to them, unions and education are simultaneous. And we were wrong, it didn't show up at the bargaining table, it showed up at the state level. But there was this resentment out there where we're paying over $2,000 a month for family insurance premiums. And we've got people working for $10 an hour that don't have insurance.
Yeah.
And when we had early retirement for people at 55, 56, getting full pay, and they're in their communities bragging about how they can retire and don't have to work, we're getting people laid off. And so you could see the resentment building by just listening across the bargaining table at some of the mentality that was coming. And the board members are sitting there, they're working the jobs at McDonald's, and they've lost them in other places. And so you got that building up for a number of years. One more story. In southwest Wisconsin, we had mediation arbitration. The arbitrator, a UW economics professor, says, I don't want to hear anything more about underpaid public servants and overtaxed citizens. We had a board member that day that lost his job. That was the insensitivity that was out there, and it boiled over. It had to, just by its nature. So what I still hear out there is there's very much now people who got elected to school boards who are anti-education, not just anti-teaching, but anti-education because of the years of being told and having things imposed. And the interest arbitration law didn't allow people to deal with the local problems. And so just all kind of, it's come loose now. The lid's off, the restrictions, and you see a lot of resentment from it.
Thank you for sharing that. That is such a stark contrast, isn't it? The school board members versus the educators and employees of the school district. Thank you.
You talked about the sense that money comes out of the state of Wisconsin and ends up basically in Milwaukee, Madison. Is that in fact the case?
Yeah. No. But not. It's a complex answer because it partly depends on the policy area. It depends on what level of government we're looking at, so county, state versus national, and also how you count it. So I'll just give you one example. So on a per capita basis, if we're talking about state funds, it's not, if anything, rural areas getting more per capita than urban areas. However, one thing to think about is the per capita basis what resonates with people, what they see and notice, right? Because what they often see and notice is that all the money is going to the cities and we get so little of it, which in geographic sense is true, right? And education is another great example of that, where even if per capita, even if it were equal, people in small communities say and feel things like, we can't have AP Spanish here because we don't have enough funds, but those kids in the suburbs, they can have AP Swahili if they want to, because there's enough economies of scale, I guess, to make it possible. So it's a great question though, that, how empirically accurate are some of these perceptions? At root, it kind of doesn't matter, honestly, because it's perceptions that matter. It's perceptions that are driving people's opinions, and it's just, as time goes on, we understand so much more about how you can give people all the facts in the world, but even people will read facts differently, given their political leanings or their sense of who's on their side and who's not. But thank you for raising that. Please.
Is this rural consciousness and resentment unique to Wisconsin, or can you compare it to like other states in the Midwest or traditional Republic states somewhere in South? I mean, what makes it unique if it is just in Wisconsin?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I don't know for sure. I've had some survey measures in other places in the country, and they basically confirm that like there's a sense that among rural people that they get less than people in the cities do. People in the cities don't tend to have the same geographic sense of injustice. But really to be able to say whether this is something that exists outside of Wisconsin, I'd have to actually listen to people and not just use surveys, right? However, just anecdotally, I can tell you that I presented this research to quite a few people, not mainly in Wisconsin, but across the country as well. And almost always, someone will raise their hand and tell a story about how that sounds just like, I worked in a gas station growing up, and wow, that sounds so familiar, and the person will be from Maine, a different place entirely, right? But then there will often be people who have lived in the city all their lives, and they'll say things like, this sounds, I can't imagine that that's the kind of conversation that goes on in, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example, Connecticut, for example. And then there'll be a debate in the crowd among people who grew up in rural areas and people who grew up in urban areas. And oftentimes, it was news to me, and I thought I grew up in small town Wisconsin, but it turns out 7,000 person town is not all that small, right? So it seems to be that it happens elsewhere, not just in Wisconsin, but I don't have systematic data to make a very convincing case. Just these stories of when I share this with other people who have lived in other rural areas say, oh yeah, I heard that kind of conversation before. Yeah. Please, you had your
Did you find differences related to age? Oh, good question. Yes. So
She said, did you find differences related to age? Not so much, but partly because most of the people I spent time with were older. So I did spend time with 4 age groups, because as time went on, it tended to be the people I was talking to were in their 40s or older. And so I started to wonder, what do younger people, how does it look? And it was somewhat of a contrast, because kids in 4 age groups tend to be high achievers, really, for lack of a better way of putting it, and did not have this sense that their community was dying. Their horizon was kind of the future and moving elsewhere, perhaps gaining skills and coming back, but it wasn't the same kind of tone. So some difference there, but I don't have great evidence of what it's like among people in their 20s and 30s, because there were some in many of these groups, but for the most part, people in their 20s and 30s, their meetup spots were the taverns, and I chickened out, to be honest. So I tried a couple times, but it just felt a little awkward being a single woman walking in and saying, so, I'm Kathy from Madison, tell me what the big concerns are in your life. So, that didn't work. So please.
I wonder if the divide is going to get even larger with technology. And, you know, I'm from Sauk County, and we don't have broadband. A lot of our communities don't have internet access. And I think about people who are in low valleys. And I mean, I wonder if the difference between technology use urban-wide is impacting this resentment.
Yeah, it could be. That's a great, I think that's probably right. Partly in some rural communities that do have broadband access, you see kind of urban influx, right? People who are deciding, I want a slower pace of life, I'm gonna do this, you know, remote work, or work for my job remotely. But then there are other places in the state where that's not even possible. So you don't get both the urban residents in your community, so you get a sense that, oh, actually they're normal human beings, right? But you also don't get the employment opportunities that expansion of technology can provide, right? Where some businesses might choose to locate in rural areas. The rural areas that aren't linked in are really at a loss for new jobs. Yeah.
I'm curious about attitudes towards the university in particular, because, I mean, the university has been very effective at talking about itself as a world-class institution. And I'm wondering if you ever get pushback. People say, well, we don't want a world-class institution. It's too expensive. You know, we just want, you know, a good mediocre university, not a world-class one. And I'm just sort of making this up, but I'm wondering if you hear that sort of thing. Why are we trying to be world-class in our educational goals?
Yeah, I do, and it seems to be that in these conversations there are two, and I'm really simplifying here, there are two general orientations towards education. There were definitely people who saw education as a way to become, right? Like be a better citizen, be a better person, have a better world. And they were often people who'd say, I would love for my kid to get into medicine. We can't afford it. Or you don't let enough people in. If that was the kind of complaint coming out of a person who expressed that kind of like, education is so important. Then there are other people who education is a means toward a job and a paycheck, right? And why, if we're putting all this money into a world-class university, that's not the point. We don't need to send our kids abroad to have these experiences, or we don't need to bring in students from foreign countries, much less Minnesota, right? Like, we just need to get people skills so they can get out there and make a living. And so usually it was that kind of line of thought that was combined with this argument that you all are trying too hard to be a global something, you know, and you have to take care of people here at home. So.
Do you have advice for those of us who teach kids from other parts of the state who haven't really thought about rural consciousness?
Yeah. So you're talking about like having suburban, urban kids in our class?
Rural.
And rural, yeah. I think that's great. I'm trying to think of how my teaching has changed since I've been doing this project. And I would say acknowledging that your classes contain students from a wide variety of places. In this, I think this would probably be useful just being on a global scale even, right? And saying, where are you from affects how you see the world. And let's listen to one another. And try not to judge for the time being, but to use this opportunity to recognize that you might look around and think that you're all from the suburbs, but you're probably not, and to invite people to share what their experience was like, because I've learned from that. And I think oftentimes, my experience has been that the rural folks, at least in political science classes, are more quiet, and they assume that they're the minority and that their voices are not going to be welcome. When in some situations, they've actually been the near majority of kids in the class, maybe it was the topic, I'm not sure why, maybe they knew I was working on, I don't know. But their perspectives were very eye-opening to the rest of us. So I think to acknowledge the differences and to invite the students themselves to talk about them. Good question. I hadn't thought about it that way. Please.
So I'm not from Wisconsin, I grew up in Hawaii, which has a entirely different relationship to the United States. And the question, but my sense as a historian is that urban-rural divide is old as civilization. I mean, people like to walk out of London in the 1400s. I mean, there's always going to be resentment between cities and rural communities that's pretty worldwide. So then the question is, and the last question is what can we do? I mean, I came to Wisconsin, I went on that idea seminar, and not just, see these places, and which was a great initiative to help, faculty members get a sense for what's out there. There are Republicans,
Right.
maximum return prisons, the schools, and all these things. But I wonder to what extent that also serves as a way of sort of marketing the university to these communities to say we are interested, we are listening, we are trying to do something. You mentioned that the realities of tax distribution and things have very little to do with perception, and like I said, that's an age-old problem. So I'd be interested to think what else we can do. I mean, beyond just kind of fatalistically saying, oh, we can do that way, and just suck it up. What else can we really do to help people at least change their perceptions?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question and complicated in that I think what ideally what would happen is more just spending time with kind of very Niagara Foundation but actually more spending time with people on the other side, if you will, and actually listening to people. But it's complicated. I say it's complicated because the perceptions that people in the cities aren't listening aren't going to change unless we actually do listen. And then I think when we do, the solution isn't necessarily changing perceptions. Meaning, we might be surprised to learn that we actually do ignore people in rural areas, you know what I mean? In the way we go about our work, in the way we talk about those people out there. So I'm not sure the solution is changing anybody's perceptions so much as actually having relationships where we get to know people and they get to know us as people who genuinely are interested in what they think. And then I think perceptions change in that kind of a relationship. But I think if the focus is genuinely on, we are interested in what you care about and how you think about the world, and we want to listen. My sense is that's the only way that you overcome misunderstandings and resentment like this. But both sides, right? I mean, they need to understand us as well. Phil, please.
Yeah, great talk and great research. But there is a big, I believe, and Kathy can give me the actual numbers, but I believe the rural society in Wisconsin makes 70% of
Yes,
70% of what urban, suburban people make.
I learned that from you. Yes, that's right, yes.
And it's a big deal. It's tough out there.
It is tough out there. And that goes back to your earlier point about, center, periphery, urban versus rural, this has always been there, right? The cities are where things go. And yet, to Bill's point, there's something different going on in rural towns in the United States right now. It's technology, it's the increasing urbanization, it's globalization, the change in agriculture, it's all these things coming together where I don't know, I wish I were more of a historian, but it seems the sense of loss in these communities is so much stronger now.
Depopulation. These places are just going away, and
They are.
and it's a tremendous sense of loss.
Yes,
And it's a big deal.
yeah. What a downer, huh?
Sorry.
No, please.
So as you talk to the different areas, did you find common ground in areas where they, where are the places that we could start common
Yeah.
ground and identity?
You know, well, that's a great question. It wasn't, yeah, the Packer, yes. I mean, well, I'll simplify this. The common ground I found was not so much about any given issue or even identity. Like sometimes, the first time I went around my fieldwork, I was visibly pregnant, and so that provided all kinds of avenues for people to feel like they knew my experience and knew me, knew of me, which was great. But I think the thing where I felt most connected to people was when I would show up the second time and they'd say, "Oh, you came back." I'd come back a third time and they'd say, "You're serious about this?" I'd come back a fourth time and they'd pull out pictures of their family, and they would say, at the end of the first conversation even, they would say things like, "You're the first professor I've ever met from UW-Madison, and you're actually kind of normal." Like just the common ground I found with folks was like, they had time to talk with me and they knew that I was kind of normal. So I think it's, in a lot of respects, it's a matter of time, which none of us have any of. So it's a difficult issue. Please.
Two things. I grew up in western South Dakota, so I can tell you that it exists in other states as well, because in South Dakota it's all about Sioux Falls and the Black Hills, and then the rest of the state. And I now live in Waunakee. I moved here in '97,
Yeah.
and Waunakee is kind of a microcosm of the state with these tensions, especially when I moved there in '97. There was a huge feeling of you people from out there, meaning anywhere out there, versus the people whose town it was.
Yeah.
And so, again, I'm on the school board. It's interesting to try to bridge those gaps. And there were assumptions, since I came from outside,
Yeah.
that I was one of those outside big city people. But I grew up in a town of 600 people in western South Dakota. So, again, I think education is, you would hope to be one of those avenues where you could talk in common language,
Yeah.
that's the benefit to everyone to move forward. But, and then lastly, Governor Walker was at the state school board convention here a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I see the next twist now that he had in his presentation was promoting technical ed and 2-year degrees as opposed to, those worthless 4-year degrees.
Yeah.
And, because 2-year degrees, those are the people that do the real work that the state needs. And by the way, he slips in, and manufacturing jobs, they have better benefits and better pay. And I'm just thinking, and most of them were unionized. So are you making that connection? But apparently not. So I think the conversation is going to continue.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's too bad he's finding another 90 days.
Oh my goodness.
So I would like to thank Professor Cramer for this. This is the first lecture that I had about the politics of Wisconsin. And up until today, I didn't know that there are just 2 cities in Wisconsin, Madison and Wisconsin, Madison and Milwaukee. So we have a little gift for Professor Cramer. And this is the picture of Bosphorus in Istanbul, and this is the latest tower.
Thank you so much. That's so great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
That's why she had to go to BP's. It's not because it wasn't even Niagara.
So we are officially done. Rest of your day.
Another thing that